The clash between Jasmine Crockett and Tucker Carlson erupted with the kind of intensity that only happens when two completely opposite worldviews collide live on national television. The debate wasn't introduced with fireworks, but the moment Tucker opened the segment with his trademark smirk and seemingly casual tone, the tension underneath was impossible to miss. The moderator barely finished the introduction before Tucker jumped in, framing his opening salvo around the idea that political discourse had become too emotional, a statement that instantly signaled where he was headed. But Jasmine Crockett, who had been quietly listening and steadily taking notes, lifted her eyes with a stare that made it clear she wasn't planning to play defense. Not tonight, not against him, and definitely not in front of millions watching in real time. The air was thick with unspoken challenge, and even the audience sensed that this wasn't going to be just another cable news exchange. It was going to be a clash of dominance, strategy, and raw authenticity. Tucker continued with a practiced confidence, leaning into claims about congressional inefficiency, painting Democrats as ineffective, and accusing leaders like Crockett of stirring division instead of offering solutions. His tone was sharp but controlled, almost taunting, as if daring her to react emotionally. The studio lights reflected on his expression, making every raised eyebrow and every carefully emphasized word feel like a jab designed to provoke. But Jasmine remained still for a moment longer, her pen tapping lightly on the table, a tiny detail but one that hinted she was building not just a rebuttal, but a strike. When she finally spoke, she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she matched his confidence with a calm, cutting precision that immediately shifted the energy in the room. She pointed out that Tucker's claims weren't based on legislative facts but on curated narratives meant to rile people up, and she did so with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed nothing yet prepared for everything. Her words were smooth but the edges were razor-sharp. Each sentence dismantled one of Tucker's points with a mix of logic, lived experience, and an undeniable command of detail. Viewers online instantly clipped the moment, noting how Tucker blinked twice, his tell the subtle sign that he hadn't expected her to flip his opening argument so quickly. Tucker attempted to regain control, talking over her, raising his pace and pivoting to crime statistics in an effort to shift to more comfortable territory. But Jasmine, known for her courtroom-like presence in debates, refused to let the conversational momentum be stolen. She leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with the posture of someone stepping into her opponent's space without leaving her own seat. She reminded him that selective numbers don't paint national realities, and she challenged him to discuss the full data set rather than the slices that fit a particular fear-based narrative. The audience felt the moment turn. Her rebuttal wasn't just strong, it was strategic. She wasn't reacting, she was steering. The moderator attempted to intervene, sensing that the back and forth was escalating faster than expected, but Jasmine gently held up a hand, not to silence the moderator, but to signal she intended to finish her point cleanly. Tucker's eyes narrowed, and he crossed his arms, a defensive move he often makes when he feels the conversation slipping. Yet the shift wasn't about dominance, it was about control, and Jasmine had seized it without raising her voice or breaking composure. Her next point struck deeper than the debate's broad political topics. She addressed Tucker's pattern of framing issues in ways that dismiss or minimize communities impacted by the very policies he criticizes. She did it by painting a vivid picture, not of abstract political players, but of real families and everyday citizens who experience the consequences of political maneuvering. This was the moment viewers later described as the emotional pivot, the point where Jasmine introduced a relatable human element, without letting the conversation dissolve into sentiment. It forced Tucker to respond not to statistics, but to lived realities, something he couldn't meet with the same ease as debating policy abstractions. Tucker pushed back with humor, his go-to strategy when he feels cornered. He chuckled mid-sentence and tried to frame her argument as overly sentimental, using sarcasm to undercut her seriousness. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she addressed his laughter head-on, telling him that dismissing real people with jokes or smirks was exactly why so many distrusted commentary shows. The moment hit hard. Even viewers used to Tucker's style noticed he hesitated before responding. What made this debate different wasn't just the content, it was the rhythm. Tucker was throwing quick, sharp barbs meant to catch her off guard, but Jasmine kept responding with depth, forcing him into conversations that required more than quick sound bites. She pulled him into longer, more complex explanations, stretching him outside the zone where he typically thrived. This changed the entire tone of the debate. The more he tried to simplify issues, the more she expanded them. The more he tried to escalate, the calmer she became. And the calmer she became, the more the audience leaned in. The live chat on the broadcast platform exploded, viewers commenting that they couldn't look away, that the tension felt electric, that every exchange seemed to raise the stakes higher. Some said Tucker seemed unusually unsettled. Others said Jasmine was performing with surgical composure. The dynamic between them had created narrative momentum, a story unfolding in real time, and every viewer could sense that they were only at the start. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a power struggle between two media. Forces whose influence shapes public perception. As the first segment neared its end, Jasmine delivered what many viewers later called the anchor point, a final summary that captured the essence of her argument with clarity and force. She looked directly into the camera and addressed the audience, not Tucker, reminding them that democracy thrives when people challenge misinformation, no matter who delivers it. Tucker attempted to interject, but for the first time in the segment, the moderator stepped in to protect the flow, giving Jasmine the final word of the round. It landed with undeniable weight. The broadcast cut to commercial, but the impact lingered. Viewers tweeted, commented, clipped, reacted, argued, and reshared. The anticipation for the upcoming segments skyrocketed. Everyone watching knew one thing: this debate was only heating up, and what was coming next was likely to be even sharper, even more intense, and far more revealing than the opening exchange. And if you're watching this breakdown right now, stay locked in, because the most explosive moments of this clash are still ahead, including the shocking scene where Jasmine takes Tucker's own logic and turns it against him in a way that left the entire studio in disbelief. You won't want to miss what unfolds next. Hit subscribe now so you're here for the full story, because it only gets more intense from here. The atmosphere in the studio when the broadcast returned was noticeably heavier, almost charged, as if both the audience and the debaters knew that the polite fences from earlier were gone. Tucker Carlson leaned back in his chair with the exaggerated ease of someone pretending not to be rattled, though his fingers tapped restlessly against the armrest. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, sat forward, centered, her posture projecting the calm assertiveness of someone ready to dissect whatever came. The energy between them had shifted, no longer a warm-up exchange, but a direct collision between two sharply defined ideologies, each refusing to yield ground. Tucker opened the next round with that familiar blend of sarcasm and disbelief that he often uses to regain dominance. He suggested that Jasmine's earlier remarks were dramatic reinterpretations of basic political issues, and he framed his tone as amused, though the tension visible around his jaw suggested otherwise. He moved quickly, listing a string of claims about government spending, border security, and media bias, each delivered with a rhetorical speed meant to overwhelm and box her into reacting impulsively. The strategy was clear: flood the conversation with rapid accusations and give her no time to unpack the pieces. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. Instead, she responded with a slowness that felt almost theatrical, as if she were choosing to stretch the silence just enough to make her control unmistakable. When she finally answered, she began by calmly sorting Tucker's claims into categories: assumptions, selective data points, and misleading generalizations, without even directly addressing them yet. This framing alone took Tucker off balance. Viewers later commented that it felt as though she had placed the entire debate on a chessboard and moved all the pieces before Tucker realized the game had changed. She then addressed each point with an almost surgical precision. Where Tucker relied on broad statements, she replied with specific references to legislation, voting records, and administrative decisions, weaving in enough detail to challenge him without bogging the conversation down. And then came the moment that viewers replayed endlessly online, the moment she took Tucker's own rhetoric from earlier in the show and folded it back on itself. He had opened the segment by criticizing emotional discourse, yet spent most of his argument relying on emotionally charged hypotheticals rather than factual anchors. Jasmine pointed this out with unnerving accuracy, quoting his own words back to him and following it with, "If emotion is the problem, why is it the foundation of every argument you've made tonight?" The comment hit like a flashbang. stunning not only Tucker but the studio audience as well. For the first time, Tucker's laughter faltered. His attempt to wave off the observation came out shakier than before, and he quickly pivoted the conversation toward crime and urban safety, a topic he often uses as familiar terrain. He cited rising incidents in major cities and implied that leaders like Jasmine were ignoring real American suffering, but Jasmine countered immediately, asking him to specify exactly which datasets he was referencing. When he responded vaguely, she calmly provided the actual statistics from federal crime reporting sources, revealing that several of the cities he mentioned had either declining crime rates or complexities he conveniently glossed over. The moderator tried to maintain neutrality, but even he couldn't hide a slight flicker of surprise as she dismantled Tucker's claims. The debate was no longer a back and forth, it was a pattern. Tucker would throw a sweeping accusation, Jasmine would ground it in facts. Tucker would claim Democrats lack solutions, Jasmine would outline exact policy proposals. Tucker would reach for sarcasm, Jasmine would counter with composure so steady it bordered on disarming. The momentum was shifting, and Tucker felt it. The next exchange intensified the shift. Tucker, clearly frustrated, tried a more aggressive approach. He accused her of dodging the real issues and implied she was more interested in performing than in genuine debate. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, boo. Jasmine didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she questioned why he felt the need to label assertive women as performers whenever they presented strong arguments. She didn't accuse him directly, but the implication hit harder than anything she could have said outright. Tucker blinked rapidly, a tell he probably hoped wasn't noticeable, before attempting a dismissive chuckle that landed awkwardly. She then pivoted the conversation back to the core issues, showing that she wasn't there to trade insults but to debate substance. Tucker, on the other hand, seemed caught between wanting to regain control and trying not to appear openly defensive. He leaned forward, interrupting repeatedly, but each interruption only highlighted how strongly Jasmine was directing the narrative. At one point, he tried steering the conversation toward personal responsibility and cultural decay, but Jasmine turned that argument around too, asking why he continually blamed communities rather than examining systemic failures often perpetuated by policies he defended. The online reaction was immediate and intense. Live chats erupted with comments analyzing every line, every expression. Some viewers claimed Tucker looked genuinely cornered for the first time in years. Others said Jasmine was delivering a masterclass in controlled rebuttal. The tension was palpable even through the screen, and producers could likely feel the numbers climbing as viewers refused to look away. Then came one of the most memorable exchanges of the entire debate. Tucker tried to accuse Jasmine of being out of touch with everyday Americans, suggesting that she cared more about political optics than real-world struggles. But Jasmine didn't accept the premise. Instead, she told a story of meeting with constituents impacted by policy decisions Tucker supported. People who lost benefits, health care, or wages due to legislation. He praised on air. She spoke not with emotional theatrics, but with grounded conviction, anchoring her points in real testimony. The moment grew heavier and quieter, even Tucker sensing the shift in gravity. He attempted to interrupt, but this time Jasmine didn't yield. Without raising her voice, she asserted her right to finish the point, and the moderator supported her. She described the ripple effects of political decisions in a way that made the conversation feel personal rather than abstract. Viewers later said this was the segment where Tucker stopped trying to debate policy and instead leaned harder into personality-driven deflections, a move that revealed how uncertain he had become of the ground he was standing on. As the segment neared its end, Tucker made one last attempt to regain footing by accusing her of pushing idealistic fantasies rather than realistic solutions. But Jasmine, with a calm so sharp it felt like steel, replied that realism without compassion is just negligence disguised as pragmatism. The line struck with perfect timing, forcing Tucker into a moment of rare speechlessness. Even the studio fell silent, the weight of her words lingering long after she finished speaking. The moderator announced another short break, but the debate had clearly reached a new stage. Viewers everywhere were left echoing the same sentiment. The tension was rising, the stakes were climbing, and the most intense confrontation was still to come. All eyes were locked on what would unfold next, as the studio lights dimmed, and the screen faded to black. When the debate resumed for the final stretch, there was a noticeable shift in the air, an almost electric anticipation that comes when both sides realize they're no longer just exchanging arguments, but shaping a defining moment. Tucker Carlson returned with a more guarded posture, sitting upright instead of his earlier laid-back pose, clearly aware that the previous segments had not unfolded the way he expected. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, steady as ever, her composure almost unnervingly controlled. Neither of them smiled. The friendliness of the segment's opening had long evaporated. What was left was a raw contest of intellect, confidence, and narrative control. Two figures locked in a high-stakes duel, each determined to claim the final word. Tucker wasted no time. Launching into a forceful monologue about political accountability, he accused leaders like Jasmine of avoiding responsibility, framing policies as collective failures instead of addressing what he called individual shortcomings within their own ranks. His voice was sharper now, his pacing faster, an unmistakable sign that he was trying to regain the authority and momentum he had gradually lost. He leaned heavily on emotionally charged examples, invoking frustration among American voters and painting a picture of widespread governmental incompetence. It was classic Tucker, grand sweeping statements intended to steer the audience toward cynicism and doubt. But Jasmine responded with a steadiness that caught him off guard. She didn't counter with equal volume or intensity. Instead, she began by dissecting his argument point by point, exposing inconsistencies without ever breaking her calm. She explained that accountability meant acknowledging the complexities of legislative processes, not simplifying every issue down to a single scapegoat or ideological villain. And then she delivered one of the night's defining lines. Leadership isn't about deflecting blame. It's about facing the facts even when they don't support your narrative. The words landed like a well-placed strike, elegant in delivery, but powerful in effect. Tucker attempted to interrupt, but Jasmine continued, unwavering. She drew comparisons between what he claimed on television and what actually occurs within the frameworks of policy, budget, and oversight. She clarified that while his show could compress issues into neat, dramatic segments, real governance required dealing with complexity. Her argument wasn't just strong, it was uncomfortably revealing for Tucker, exposing the gap between simplified commentary and real-world problem-solving. The audience felt the shift immediately. For the first time, Tucker seemed to hesitate before responding, his usual rapid-fire confidence momentarily stumbling. He regained footing by pivoting to immigration, another topic he often used as a rhetorical anchor. He argued that leaders like Jasmine were ignoring the crisis at the border, insisting that failure to enforce strict policies endangered Americans. His voice rose slightly, as if he hoped volume would reinforce conviction, but Jasmine countered by pointing out the flawed premise. She explained that border issues were the result of decades of inconsistent policy under both parties, and she emphasized the need for humane, effective solutions rather than reactionary, fear-based narratives. Then she delivered another blow. If fear solved problems, the border would have been fixed a long time ago. The room reacted subtly. Audience members shifted, producers glanced around, and viewers online erupted. Tucker pressed harder, visibly frustrated, repeating that she was avoiding the real dangers. But Jasmine didn't let him control the framing. This time, she turned his own strategy back on him. She listed occasions where he used isolated incidents to generalize an entire population, pointing out that such tactics inflame public fear, but offer no path forward. She did it calmly, almost conversationally, which made the critique even sharper. It wasn't hostility, it was exposure. And Tucker felt it. He attempted a final pivot toward cultural arguments, accusing political figures of undermining traditional American values. This was familiar ground for him, a terrain where he usually thrived. He spoke with rising passion, describing a nation losing itself, implying that leaders like Jasmine enabled cultural decline. The rhetoric was dramatic, emotional, and intended to rally viewers who followed him for his cultural commentary. But Jasmine challenged him in a way he didn't anticipate. She asked who exactly defined these traditional values, and why dissenting voices were excluded from that definition. She argued that America's strength came from diversity of thought, culture, background, not from rigid adherence to a single vision of identity. Her words resonated with a clarity that momentarily left Tucker silent. She then pointed out that invoking nostalgia for an idealized past often ignored the struggles many communities faced during those very same eras. Her argument reframed the conversation not as a battle over values, but as an examination of selective memory, something Tucker could not easily counter without contradicting himself. The tension between them had reached a point where every pause felt amplified, every breath carrying weight. The moderator, sensing the intensity, mostly stayed out of the clash, allowing the two to finish what had clearly become a battle of endurance as much as ideology. Tucker's eyes narrowed, his tone shifting from authoritative to defensive. Jasmine, meanwhile, refused to lean away from the confrontation. She held the center with unmistakable confidence, answering each challenge without giving up an inch. Then came the final escalation. Tucker accused her of wanting to control narratives rather than participate in honest debate, suggesting she was manipulating facts. But Jasmine, with a tone that carried no anger, only precision, asked him to specify which facts she was manipulating. The question itself was a trap, because specificity required evidence he hadn't presented. He hesitated, then attempted to reframe the question rather than answer it. Jasmine immediately pointed out the dodge, and the audience felt the impact. It was the intellectual equivalent of a checkmate, clean, undeniable, and seen by everyone watching. The closing minutes were less a debate and more a silent acknowledgement of what had unfolded. Tucker tried to regain composure, offering his final points with a tone that aimed for calm authority, but the earlier confidence had cracked. Jasmine delivered her closing remarks with measured strength, reiterating the importance of truth, accountability, and resisting manipulation, principles that underscored everything she had displayed throughout the debate. When the moderator finally ended the broadcast, the room exhaled as if releasing pressure built over the entire confrontation. Tucker leaned back, eyes distant, clearly processing the battle he had just endured. Jasmine gathered her notes calmly, offering no gloating, no victory posturing, just the quiet assurance of someone who knew exactly what kind of performance she had delivered. Viewers flooded social platforms with reactions within seconds. Some replayed the sharpest exchanges, others debated who came out on top, and many praised the sheer intensity of the confrontation. But one thing was unanimous. This debate had become more than an argument. It was a defining moment showcasing the clash between commentary and conviction, rhetoric and reality, provocation and composure. And as the lights dimmed and the cameras shut off, the world was still echoing with the energy of everything that had just unfolded, a confrontation that would be talked about, analyzed, and replayed for a long time to come.